And now it is time to commence with the induction of our 2015 electees to the Shrine of the Eternals and the unveiling and presentation of the inductee plaques. The three individuals we honor today were elected by the membership of the Baseball Reliquary in voting conducted in April, and they received the highest number of votes from a ballot consisting of 50 candidates. Two identical plaques have been assembled in honor of each inductee, one which is presented to the inductee and one which becomes part of the permanent collection of the Baseball Reliquary and which is used for exhibition purposes. I would like to acknowledge the presence of William Scaff, former Pasadena resident, artist, and longtime reliquarian, who way back in 1999 designed the acrylic plaques we give annually to our inductees. Bill, are you here? He just stepped out. Bill also designed both the Hilda and Tony Salin Memorial Awards. We'll make sure to acknowledge him when he comes back. And I would also like to acknowledge Mary Cannon, the artistic director of the Baseball Reliquary, who selects the colors that are used in the fabrication of each and every plaque. And considering that today we will unveil our 49th, 50th, and 51st induction plaques, it is not at all an easy task to create new color schemes and to not duplicate past ones. So we thank Mary for a job well done. For any kid who collected or traded baseball cards in their youth, who attached them to bicycle spokes, or who cried when their cards were tossed out by an unsympathetic mother, you can thank our first inductee for providing your childhood with some of its richest memories. Cy Berger's induction is a family affair and will be introduced by his son, Glenn, and accepted by his daughter, Maxine. Glenn Berger lives in Concord, New Hampshire, where he is a retired elementary school guidance counselor, much beloved for nearly 3 decades by the students and teachers at Bow Elementary School, where he was affectionately referred to as Mr. B. To introduce his father's induction into the Shrine of the Eternals, please welcome Mr. B.
Talking to 4- and 5-year-olds. So, excuse me. Well, Tom, Gary, and Charlie certainly stimulated memories of my own past. And I traveled around with my dad to many different clubhouses. And he would often bring back relics to me. And he'd say, Ted Williams sent you this bat. To this day, I still have the bat. My sister doesn't know about this. And I go up to the attic where I've hid it in the cylinder, and every now and then hold it, and just get the feeling. In Little League, I played with Jimmy Pearsall's glove. It was a 6-fingered glove. He threw it at my dad, and Jimmy Pearsall was kind of emotional. He threw it. He didn't like the stitching. And he said, give it to your son. And for years, I played with it. Now, it was very different than Gil McDougall's glove, who was a second baseman. So thank you for Gary and Charlie. I have so many memories of my father coming home on trips and just giving things to me, and I didn't know what to do with them. I was passionate about them, and I've hid them from my sister and my brother for years. So on behalf of the family of Cy Berger, I'd like to echo I thought my sister was speaking first, by thanking Terry Cannon and the Baseball Reliquary, and I didn't know what reliquary meant. I thought it was a good Scrabble word that I'll use in the future, for honoring our dad into the Shrine of the Eternals. Congratulations to the families of Glenn Burke, whose personal courage and introduction of the high five will live with us forever, and Steve Bilko, whose larger-than-life heroics, especially in the Pacific Coast League, placed him as a superhero of athletes. Now, if my dad were here today, the first thing he would do upon hearing the names of Steve Bilko and Glenn Burke was to share some personal stories about them. He would then rise from his chair and grab a baseball register or another 10 or 20-pound book of baseball statistics and look up with a magnifying glass what Steve Bilko and Glenn Burke did. We would, of course, find that Steve had some mammoth seasons in the PCL, over 700 at-bats, 164 RBIs, 164 runs. And Glenn Burke, we would chat about his ability to steal bases, that he stole 63 in Albuquerque in 1976. The recollections of stories and number crunching was something I did regularly with my dad throughout many, many hours together. He was an accounting major in college, good in math and loved statistics. My earliest recollection of Dad was watching him work, burning that midnight oil to 12, 1, 2, on the format design and the statistics of the early baseball cards in 53 and 54. He would hold his pencil with a tightness meticulously. He was a very meticulous writer, and he would always have a pencil stuck in his ear. It was usually yellow. I stole this from the library. So the following anecdotes are not so much a story about baseball, but of the enduring trusts and friendships that he endured. Dad was everyone's best friend, including my own, from the baseball club owner to the clubhouse attendant to the fan who would write him a letter. If there was something he could do for you, he would discover what you needed and deliver the service unconditionally. Cesar Cedeno was a Dominican ball player who got himself into quite a bit of trouble in the Dominican in 1973. He had one phone call to make, and it came into Dad's office. I need your help. Dad certainly helped him out. I mean, and there are certain things I can't share with you how Dad helped out ball players. But he was always there for them, and they were always there for him. Willie Mays, who became, Dad became Willie Mays' agent after he retired, was sitting at his locker one day after an initial slump at the beginning of his career. Dad walked over and in his calm and caring manner said, "What is wrong, son?" I can still hear that, putting his hand on my shoulder. "What is wrong, son?" I mean, it was many times. A chat ensued, and they became best friends for life. After Dad introduced his brilliant contract, which allowed Topps to sign minor league baseball players to bubblegum card agreements, I think Wes Parker probably had one of those, right? I don't know what city. Do you recall the city? No. He became an uncle, mentor, and family member to all the ball players and their families. He would send gum and cards to the children of executive baseball players and about just about anyone who crossed his path. And he was considered Uncle Si for many, even though they had never met him. The $5 check the ball players received in the minor leagues became a symbol of having made it in baseball. Although he worked primarily in baseball, Dad worked with Brian Epstein of the Beatles. Let me regress for a second. I covered the minor leagues, all the A teams throughout the country from about 64 to, I worked until into my 30s. And I'd go around and sign these ball players, every ball player to a bubblegum card contract. I'd give them a $5 check. And the managers would often get together at these single-light clubs and they'd say, this is Topps, Cy Berger, sign it or don't play. And that was how it was. And I signed thousands of ball players from Rick Mount at Newark to Tony Gwynn in Bellingham at Walla Walla. And it was quite an exciting job for a kid of 16 and 17 for many years. So Dad worked with Brian Epstein of the Beatles to secure the rights to print Beatle picture cards. He was a wonderful negotiator. He loved to schmooze, create friendships, and create contracts on a handshake. One morning in London, he woke up Brian Epstein at an ungodly hour. And Brian Epstein basically said, "Get the hell out of here." Dad answered him in Yiddish. Brian invited him in for breakfast, and the Beatles was signed. Dad also hammered out a contract at Michael Jackson's Neverland Ranch, which gave birth to Michael Jackson trading cards. So whenever Michael Jackson was in town, Dad was invited to his private parties. Dad dealt with people on a handshake, a grasp of trust, and once a friend, always a friend. For our father, there was a story behind each card, every ball player, every manager, every trainer, and everyone he ever met. He would become their confidant. Casey Stengel used to welcome Dad into the clubhouse by announcing, "Bubblegum is here." Tommy Lasorda referred to Dad as roomie. I assume they roomed together at certain conventions. And Miguel Cuellar would refer to Dad as Senior Si. Dad loved every day of his life, whether it was serving in World War II and losing $600 gambling on the ship home, or driving the daily route to Brooklyn to sit in a small, modest office surrounded by the aroma of bubblegum, bazooka bubblegum, being manufactured 2 floors below on the same premises. When the baseball teams would come to New York, he would take me along. He would chat with ball players, coaches about life, their tops contracts, whatever they wanted, including what their wives wanted if they gave premiums in those days, washing machines in lieu of $250. I recall sitting on Mickey Mantle's knees and watching him wrap his knees. I remember the strength of Del Crandall's hands and telling me I should be a catcher. I was a very modest ball player. Hank Aaron's magnificent presence, Billy Pierce's interest in you, Eddie Matthews' strength, Willie Mays and Bob Keegan's friendship, and when my dad turned his back, Minnie Minoso offering me chewing tobacco and showing me how to chew it. I didn't get sick. In the future, I would get sick trying it another time. Dad made the rounds. He honored everyone. He honored the scouts and college coaches by sponsoring award dinners in New York City, bringing them in. These were bird dog scouts who made next to nothing, and he would honor them. He would give them awards, and it was really beautiful. During spring training, Dad would host an all-night managers meeting. Only managers were allowed. George Steinbrenner and other owners tried to gain admittance, but they were not allowed in. Trades were made, stories were told. Though he told me many stories, he was adamant about not writing a book because trust, loyalty, and confidentiality were not just words for him, but a philosophy of life for him. He loved life from the days of sneaking into Yankee Stadium as a boy to cutting school to listen to Ella Fitzgerald in Harlem. When Jackie Robinson arrived in Brooklyn, he said, "Let's go." He took him around the city so he could secure financial sponsorships. The players loved him. They tried to trick him during the photography sessions by batting left-handed instead of right. Ball players were extremely private, such as Ted Williams, Steve Carlton, Roger Maris. And these were players who were extremely close to him. He was always there for them. Dad was honored as king of baseball at one of baseball's winter meetings. He died on December 14th, 2014. And as Conan Bryan remarked on the show, Cy Berger, the designer of the modern baseball card, has died. He will be laid to rest in a shoebox somewhere in an attic. And don't think I'm not going through all those shoeboxes. I took most of the stuff up to New Hampshire. Dad was also immortalized with a similar joke on Saturday Night Live. Dad adopted all others and was everyone's father and mentor. Wiser and older mentors also relished Dad's youthfulness, intelligence, and friendship. When Bert Bell was the commissioner of the NFL, he came to Dad and said, "You have the next franchise." Dad laughed because he had no money. Maybe he was making $25,000. He said, "How?" Bert Bell had put together a slew of investors for him. Bert Bell died that summer prior to the new franchise entering the NFL. It was the Minnesota Vikings. Dad continued to work for Topps, and I am not sure that Dad would have ever left that iconic position that he created for himself. Nevertheless, Dad spent over half a century at Topps Chewing Gum, smelling bazooka, sending cartons of baseball cards to any kid he ever met, handing out Mickey Mantle souvenirs and hiring a barge to dump the 52 series in the ocean. Dad spoke with his eyes, and his love of life and people often would bring a tear, a light to his eyes like a proud father. He was a father to all, and all you needed was an introduction and a handshake to become a cherished friend and part of the journey. His greatest fans were his kids. I have hundreds, thousands of letters, just a couple lines from one or two of them. "Dear Mr. Sy, recently my father passed away, which I haven't got over. One of the great passions we both enjoyed was collecting baseball cards. I want to personally thank you for giving my dad and I such a great hobby." And then he says, he wanted my dad's autograph. This will be greatly appreciated and cherished forever. To a great person, a genius from a fan, Ren Stinson. And he had hundreds of these letters. I'd like to just I opened thousands of baseball packs in my life, thousands. None I've ever paid for, by the way. And I couldn't find them in the stores. I'd search all of Concord, New Hampshire. Concord's, you know, a small town. But I found these, 1996, with some cards in it and the famous Bazooka bubble gum. And so I want to thank you for allowing me to open up probably my most memorable pack of baseball cards that I've ever done. And Dad, Senor Sy, Mr. Thompson, Bubblegum Man, you will always be with us. And thank you very much.
And now as we unveil Sy Berger's induction plaque to accept on behalf of the Berger family, Maxine Berger.
Thank you. Anyhow, both my mom, Gloria, and my younger brother, Gary, would have loved to be here today to celebrate Steve Bilko, Glenn Burke, and my dad, Sy Berger. I will be accepting the plaque on behalf of my mom because my father would have wanted her to have it. They were married 69 years, and she shared so much of his life and his career in baseball. But before I do that, she did write an acceptance speech. She's 92. I want to read a statement Willie Mays gave to the press on December 14th, 2014, the very day my father passed away. I think it echoes the sentiments of so many of Dad's baseball friends. Subject, goodbye to my best friend. What can I say about Sy Berger? He was my longtime friend. He helped me from my first days in the majors. I never could have made it without him. He always knew the right thing to say or the right thing to do. We worked together. We laughed together. We grew up together. What I can say to you is, he was my friend. What I would say to him is, so long, old pal, Willie Mays. And now my mom's acceptance speech. She emailed it to me. Okay, no, she did. She's great. Anyhow. So thank you for recognizing and honoring Sy by electing him into the Shrine of the Eternals. I would have loved to have been at the induction in person, but I'm happy that 2 of my 3 children could be with you to accept this plaque. Congratulations to the families of Steve Bilko and Glenn Burke, who Sy signed to many of their own baseball cards. To think the modern-day baseball card got its beginning on the kitchen table in our first house that we purchased upon Sy's return at the end of World War II. He would work every evening after dinner, sometimes as late as 3 a.m., until he had what he thought was the perfect baseball card for a new modern era, the 1950s. Sy always gave his best to whatever job he approached, as that was the only way he knew how to work. He did this for greater than 50 years at the Topps Company. Sy was a friend to everyone in baseball, from owners to managers to coaches to players to clubhouse staff. From this humble beginning, little did Sy dream that he would become an icon and mentor to so many, and that the accolades and recognition continue today, 7 months after his death. But Sy will always be remembered and forever in the hearts of a generation and society when baseball cards were king. Thank you again for honoring my husband in this way. Gloria Berger.
Now our second inductee is Glenn Burke, and we are going to begin with a short video DVD clip of about 5 minutes, and then we'll bring Doug Harris, who's going to introduce Glenn's induction to the stage. So we are going to quickly move to this way. Okay. Okay.
Glenn Burke playing center field tonight. His first World Series appearance. He takes the first pitch in the World Series from Don Gullett for ball one.
He was blackballed out of the game because of his sexual preference.
Everyone's career ends, but to do it because you don't feel like you belong there when you've proven that you do is damaging.
So here's a guy that was fighting not just the opposing pitcher that was trying to get him out. He was fighting the unknown.
Glenn was told by the Dodgers, or offered by the Dodgers to, you know, allegedly get this bonus if he had a wife. Glenn took exception to that, refused to do it, and openly dated Tommy Lasorda's son.
It was just the tension in the clubhouse. You could cut it with a knife.
Burke said, I cannot take it anymore. Why do I have to be lying? I said, I'm a homosexual. And then I said to myself, I used to shower with this guy almost every day.
Because you look over in his locker, you know, and he had this red jock in his locker. You know, nobody wore a red jock. You know, and Glenn wore a red jock, and, you know, he'd be dancing around in the clubhouse.
He was on his crack, and he was a wild and woolly character.
He said, well, my wife, she works for the health department. And she said that some guys had contacted this gay disease. They used to call it a gay disease. And they said that he was one of the ones that had contact with them. And I was like, oh.
And then I remember one day I was at the stadium at Candlestick, and this guy came down weighing about 100.5. And he was looking great. He said, Johnny B, I recognize the voice, but I didn't recognize the person.
And Glenn started to cry. He said, I've been told you're going to help me. Somebody wants to help me. I can't believe somebody wants to help me.
This is as good a time as any to thank John Leonidakis for his technical assistance. When John called me up a couple of days ago and said, hey, do you need any help? I don't think he thought he was going to be getting into this. But we appreciate his assistance, and thank you so much. Our second inductee, Glenn Burke, will be introduced by Doug Harris and accepted by Glenn's sister, Paula Hunt. A Berkeley native and former college basketball All-American, Doug Harris has enjoyed a successful career in media that dates back to 1995. He has produced countless video profiles, documentaries, and media for government agencies, nonprofits, educational institutions, sports organizations, and cable television. Among his many acclaimed documentaries are Bounce, the Don Barksdale story, about the sports and entertainment pioneer who was the NBA's first black all-star in the 1950s, for which he received the 2008 Beacon Award from the Association of Cable Communicators for the nation's best single program. In 2010, he co-produced with Sean Madison Out, the Glenn Burke story for Comcast Sportsnet, which we just saw a clip from, and he received an Emmy nomination for that documentary. He is currently working on a documentary about Shrine of the Eternals inductee Emmett Ashford, the first African-American in both minor league and Major League Baseball. Doug has served as a United Nations non-governmental organizations representative with the Department of Public Information and developed AUP Media, a component of the Berkeley nonprofit organization Athletes United for Peace, which is committed to promoting peace, education, and friendship through sports and media. To introduce the induction of Glenn Burke into the Shrine of the Eternals, please welcome Doug Harris.
Let's start off by getting some height up here. I don't like being slumped down. It's truly an honor to be here this afternoon to introduce a friend of mine and a hometown hero. Glenn Burke was my idol growing up as a young kid in Berkeley, where I first became introduced to sports through baseball. You know, growing up in Berkeley, we followed the Giants. Willie Mays, Willie McCovey, just the whole group. And a short time later, the Oakland A's came to the Bay Area, you know, in 1968. So that was actually closer than going out to Candlestick Park. So I really enjoyed watching Reggie Jackson, Rick Monday, and players like that. And also being a big fan of baseball cards. I had my fair share, which got thrown out, and I could really resonate with your story. We love those baseball cards. But as a kid growing up in Berkeley, my first introduction to Glenn Burke was actually not through baseball, it was basketball. And Glenn was a phenomenal basketball player. It's something that a lot of people don't really know. The first time I saw Glenn Burke in a basketball situation was at UC Berkeley, Harmon Gym. They changed the name to Haas. But Glenn Burke was waiting to get winners. I'm only in the 7th grade, so I'm up there stargazing, and I feel funny, I'm slumped over. And so Glenn, I'm just there watching, hanging out in the gym and watching these older men. And so Glenn Burke is on the sidelines by one of the little side baskets, and he's waiting for his winners to get on the court. And, you know, Glenn is like 5'10", 5'11". And so Glenn Burke standing under the basket, right underneath the basket, and he sees me kind of, you know, looking at him, you know, this little kid looking at him. And so what he does is this. I'm going to step back and show you what he does. He stands from a standstill, and he jumps up off just a standstill. He triple pumps the ball like this, and then he dunks it back. Okay, now that's something that you don't see NBA players do, let alone someone that's only 5'11". So that was like my introduction to seeing Glenn Burke. And Glenn Burke could hold his own with just about any NBA player, you know, that came through and played with the guys at Harmon Gym. So years later, you know, I found out that Glenn Burke, you know, was also a star baseball player. And it was at the time that I was in high school, my senior year, actually at Berkeley High, that Glenn Burke was like one of my #1 fans. He would come to my games because we both went to the same high school. He 8 years prior to me. I graduated in '78. And so Glenn would come to the games, and I was like, wow, Glenn Burke is here, and he was rooting me on. And I was trying to figure out if Glenn was there, you know, to follow his alma mater and to root me on, or was he there to keep an eye on his sister who was a cheerleader? So, you know, the jury's still out as to why he was there, but I think it was probably for both reasons. And so it was at that point that Glenn Burke really, you know, had an impact on my life, and I really looked up to him because it was at this time that he was, you know, playing for the Dodgers. And so that was really great. When I had the opportunity to produce the film about Glenn Burke's life, it was a real challenge, but it was really an enjoyable experience for me because growing up in Berkeley, we had this thing called playing the dozens or cutting people up, and that's when you make fun of people and joke about them and stuff. And Glenn was the champion of cutting people up, talking about people, playing the dozens, whatever you called it in your community. But he was like a comedic figure that was incredible. And I'm learning more about this from a lot of his Major League Baseball teammates. I mean, a lot of the stories that the teammates would openly share with me about Glenn Burke didn't really have a lot to do with baseball. I mean, it did because it was a baseball film, but the stories were so interesting about how Glenn would kill them on the basketball courts, on days off and during spring training, you know, because guys that play Major League Baseball, a lot of them play basketball too. And on, you know, when they're not playing baseball, they're shooting hoops. And just the stories were incredible about what Glenn would do to these guys. And they openly shared it, and it was a lot of fun. But even more so than that, and Lyle Spencer also made reference to it in the documentary, was that the character and the personality of Glenn Burke. And in preparing for this introduction, you know, over the weekend here in the Pasadena area, I've been thinking to myself is like, what kind of career Glenn could have had here in this entertainment area of Southern California had he not passed away, had things went a different way for him in pro baseball. But, you know, when people retire, they go into the television broadcasting field, they go into entertainment, they become comedians, you know, the afterlife of the athlete. And I've just been thinking is like, Glenn Burke, he would have been a hell of a comedian. I mean, incredible. The way our ESPN, the way our sports has switched over to a more comical type of situation, you know, when we get our sports reports, you know, that may have been something that Glenn could have been incredible with. And so I just think that losing Glenn was a great loss. Glenn had an incredible impact on the East Bay communities of Berkeley and Oakland, San Francisco, and for that matter, across the nation for his pioneering efforts in sports. And it's just an honor for me to be here to introduce his induction. And I'd like to thank Terry, the Hall of Eternals, and everyone involved, all of you here today. On behalf of the Glenn Burke family, I would like to introduce my close friend and classmate, Paula Hunt, Glenn's sister, to accept his award today. Come on up, Paula.
Thank you, Doug. Greetings to all. I am honored and pleased to be here today to accept this award and acknowledgement on behalf of my brother, Glenn Burke. I know that he would have been honored too. Growing up with Glenn was a lot of fun. He used to tease me all the time. He told me I was adopted. He told me a lot of things. There were 6 girls and 2 boys. Glenn was the 5th to the eldest sibling. As far back as I can remember, Glenn was always playing sports. He lived it, he breathed it. It was his life, and that's what kept him going until it didn't. I can remember when my mother would beckon my older siblings when it was dinner time, and she would say, "Go find that boy." And they would go to the gym, they would go to the park. He was always there playing ball. Then he would come home. Glenn had so many friends and fans throughout his career who truly cared for him and cheered him on. Once Glenn lost his ability to play sports due to an accident and later illness, his life changed drastically in front of our eyes. I speak for my entire family that Glenn will always be our hero, and we will always be his #1 fans. I would like to take this opportunity to thank you on behalf of the entire Glenn Burke family, We are truly honored that the Baseball Reliquary selected our brother to be one of the inductees in the Shrine of the Eternals and to receive this prestigious award today. I would also like to thank Terry for contacting me to be here to represent the entire family and to accept this award on behalf of my brother. And lastly, thank you, Doug. I know the Out documentary was a fabulous documentary, but it still remains very difficult for me to watch because it was my brother. Thank you very much.
As a prelude to the introduction of our third and final inductee, we are delighted to bring back to the stage Ross Altman, who will perform Who's On First, a song that he has written for today's festivities in honor of Steve Bilko.
Thank you so much, Terry. It's a great honor to be here every year. Terry sends out the list of the players and other baseball figures, because it's not limited to players, who have been elected to the Shrine of the Eternals. And every year I've heard, I don't know, since we became friends some years back, every year I look at the list, and when I get to the end of it, I say, "Where's Steve?" So, I don't have to do that anymore. Thank you. Before the Dodgers moved to LA, you think we didn't have baseball? We had the Angels, Pacific Coast League, home run legend Steve Bilko. Even his strikeouts brought us to our feet, prodigious Titanic stats. Sometimes he swung like Kirk Gibson, and others like Casey at the bat. But when that bat connected, it was music to our ears. Take measure homers, just like the Bay, we put them in the stratosphere. What's on second? I don't know what's on third, according to Abbott and Costello. But who's on first? That's easy. LA Angels, Steve Bilko, the Angelino Bambino, working class coal miner's son. He was our Babe Ruth, Mickey Mantle, and Ted Williams, all rolled into one. When that bat connected, it was music to our ears. Take measure homers, just like the Babe, you put them in the stratosphere. I think I stole that line from Bobby Bridge. 1956, he won the Triple Crown. He's in the baseball reliquaries answered at Cooperstown. The Shrine of the Eternals, a perfect place for an angel. You can look it up with Roger Maris and Casey Stengel. When that bat connected, it was music to our ears. Take measure homers, just like the babe in the stratosphere. From Nanticoke, PA, to Wrigley Field, LA, he didn't have to work in the coal mines like his old man back in the day. This moon-faced lumbering first baseman drank beer instead of wine. They tried, but they couldn't change him. Heart attack at 49. But when that band connected, it was music to our ears. Tape measure homers, just like the babe, he put them in the stratosphere.
When the Baseball Reliquaries Board of Directors made the official announcement in May that Steve Bilko had been elected to the Shrine of the Eternals, my initial thought was, who's going to introduce his induction? There were two journalists who had written extensively about Steve Bilko and who had in recent years advocated for his election to the Shrine of the Eternals, John Schulian and Galen H. White. In fact, John Schulian had written the foreword for Galen's book, The Bilko Athletic Club, which was published last year. So our quandary was, who do we invite to introduce Bilko when both are so deserving of the honor? Then we got to thinking, well, why not ask both? So we did, and John and Galen were delighted to share the honors. And of course, all of us who have gathered here today are the beneficiaries of their friendship and teamwork as we are able to enjoy their unique and individual perspectives on a baseball icon. John Schulian will be up first, and he needs little in the way of introduction. As a sports writer and columnist and television writer and producer, he is widely regarded as one of the great wordsmiths of this or any other era. John was twice hailed by the Associated Press sports editors as the country's best sports writer. He has appeared on this stage at numerous Shrine induction ceremonies, elevating the discourse with his brilliant prose, most recently in 2014 when he introduced Dizzy Dean's induction. This fall will mark a first for John when his debut novel, A Better Goodbye, is published by Tyrus Books. John will be followed to the lectern by Galen H. White, who was born in Los Angeles and currently resides in Cartersville, Georgia. Galen is an author, columnist, and communications consultant. Before entering the corporate world as a speechwriter for top executives, he was a sports writer for the Denver Post and Arizona Republic. Galen's book, The Bilko Athletic Club, the story of the 1956 Los Angeles Angels, has received terrific reviews. Baseball historian Bill Swank called it a West Coast version of The Boys of Summer, and fellow author Harry Turtledove said the Bilko Athletic Club knocks over the head the silly notion that Los Angeles baseball sprang full-grown from Walter O'Malley's forehead in 1958. And I'm forever jealous that Galen White got to interview Steve Bilko. So let's begin by welcoming the first presenter from our blockbuster Bilko tag team, John Schulian.
Well, you wait 60 years and you get to introduce Steve Bilko. I was 10 years old when I washed out of parochial school. Though I was never personally told why, it may have had something to do with my notions of the Holy Trinity. On my right was John Wayne, who not only won World War II for us, but tamed the Old West. Please no cracks about the time he played Genghis Khan, Pilgrim. On my left was Elvis Presley, who walked into Sam Phillips' legendary Sun Studios in Memphis and announced that he wanted to make a record. "Who do you sound like?" Phillips asked him. And Elvis said, "I don't sound like nobody." The two of them, Elvis and the Duke, were cultural beacons who needed no last names when the conversation was about them. The third member of my trinity had no national identity, save for that bestowed upon him by the baseball cards from his stops with the St. Louis Cardinals and Chicago Cubs. At this point, Steve Bilko wasn't even a big leaguer. He was a Los Angeles Angel playing in the old Pacific Coast League. And yet he loomed largest in my imagination because he was a local phenomenon, a colossus both physically and statistically. "Not even Mrs. Bilko knows his weight," said a headline in the LA Times. The city's felt denizens could smirk all they wanted, but the only thing that mattered to me was that Steve Bilko seemed to have been deposited in the city's Wrigley Field at Avalon and 42nd Place for the sole purpose of knocking down the walls with his big bat. He warmed up with 37 home runs in 1955, then bashed 55 in 56 and 56 in 57, and I was sore amazed. I knew of Babe Ruth in only a tangential way. I remember hearing the news of his death on the radio when I was 3. Even Willie Mays and Mickey Mantle, then in high gear, seemed like apparitions no matter how brilliant they were, for they romped and grabbed headlines on the other side of the country. But Steve Bilko was right here in front of me, whether I was at the ballpark or watching on TV. Of course, I had no idea where he came from or of how the game of baseball had knocked him around. Did broadcasters even talk about things like that in those days? Surely they must have at least pointed out how great a team the 56 Angels were as they ran away from the rest of the Coast League. But all that mattered to me was Bilko. A careful reading of his baseball card told me he'd hit 21 homers for the Cards in 1953. And the thought of him in the same lineup with the sublime Stan Musial struck me as perfect. But Bilko wasn't in St. Louis anymore, and he hadn't cut it with the Cubs. And there were kids in my neighborhood, budding heretics, who dared to say it was because he was fat. I preferred to think of him as well-fed. When I discovered later that he occasionally enjoyed double rations of beer, I decided he was simply washing down the meat and potatoes. But here's the thing about baseball. Once you get a label, getting rid of it is more difficult than performing an appendectomy on yourself. So Bilko became one of those tweeners, deemed too good for the minor leagues and not quite good enough for the majors. He would prove the doubters and naysayers wrong when he came back at the end of his career and had admirable seasons with the Tigers and the American League incarnation of the Angels. The record book tells us he smashed 20 homers in 1961, but that's only part of the story. The last of them was also the last one hit at Wrigley Field, where he had become the kind of legend baseball has all but forgotten. In the minor leagues of old, the ones where the ballparks were WPA projects and teams traveled in rickety buses that had been abandoned by church choirs and bluegrass bands, there was a special breed of hero, the vagabond slugger. He batted cleanup in Portland or Lincoln, Nebraska one year, and Fort Worth or Palatka, Florida the next, feasting on pitchers who were scared kids or tired old men and dreading the curveball, that old hipper-dipper, as Nick Cullop called it, with a shudder, even in the year his homer total in Minneapolis reached 86. You could read all about them in the back pages of the Sporting News, amid 1-inch ads for baseball schools in the Ozarks. That was where their legends were born and too often died. For who remembers that Bob Cruz terrorized the West Texas-New Mexico League by batting .404 with 69 homers and 254 RBIs? That's right, 254 in 140 games. And who remembers that Joe Bauman showed up in Roswell, New Mexico, looking to get out of baseball and run a gas station, only to hit 72 home runs in a single season? Who remembers that Fat Pat Siri promised a steak for every home run he hit in Colorado Springs, got the whole cow at the season's end? And who remembers Mo Hill, the toast of Wisconsin Rapids, who got 300 write-in votes for mayor, and in Waterloo, a rude welcome that included placards saying, "You can't make a mountain out of Mo Hill." It was the stuff of small-town America. But keep in mind that when Steve Bilko owned Los Angeles, it was as small as a town with 2 million people can be, golden with promise and perfumed by eucalyptus and citrus trees. There were white picket fences in Westwood, red-line streetcars on their way to extinction, and the Pasadena Freeway as a harbinger of the future. My father bought a 1956 Chevy from Lou Stringer, a nifty second baseman for both the Angels and the Hollywood Stars. And throughout my neighborhood in Inglewood, there were ball players. Hank Sauer, the National League's 1952 MVP, the unstoppable Coast League slugger George Metkovich, the wily Gene Mauch. They lived alongside the people who had to pay to play them watch. Surely the great Bilko must have graced the neighborhood when he visited his friend and teammate Mauch. Maybe he went to the movies at the Art Deco Academy Theater as I did, or bought the Sporting News at the same market on Crenshaw. Alas, I never laid eyes on him, but I did have his baseball card from his days in St. Louis. I got it when I was trading cards with a fast operator named Richie Dillon. Richie Dillon was a worldly 12, and I was a naive 11. I like to think that he went on to make a fortune from stock fraud or real estate scams. I also like to imagine that he got caught, because even when he played me for a sucker, he made one big mistake. Among the cards for Harry Cheedy, Coot Veal, and Bobby Del Greco, there was a Steve Bilko. Anywhere else, it wouldn't have meant as much, but this was LA in 1956, and Bilko had cast his spell on the city. It was as though he'd taken a leave of absence from being flesh and blood, or so it seemed to the kid I was then, the innocent who thought home runs began and ended with him, and held tight to a Bilko baseball card as proof that even a young swindler wasn't infallible. That time is gone, of course, but not forgotten, not ever. Thank you.
Thank you, John. You may notice it takes two of us to introduce Big Steve Bilko. Bilko was so big in LA in 1956 that Bob Sheffing, his manager, said that more people in LA today know Bilko than Marilyn Monroe. Bilko was so big that actor Phil Silvers adopted the Bilko name for the master sergeant he played on his television show. Bilko Silvers said, "I could just as well have been Corporal Hodges or Private First Class Stan Musial. I gave it to a guy who needed it." Steve Bilko was an icon, an authentic folk hero, King Kong of Pacific Coast League, Paul Bunyan of the Bushes. In 1976, I spent a day with Bilko in Nanticoke, Pennsylvania, trying to understand why he wasn't the big star in the majors that he was in the Coast League. When I first saw Bilko hit a home run at Wrigley Field in LA in 1955, I thought he was Babe Ruth. I was 9 years old, and a lot of things to me were larger than life. But Bilko was big like Babe. And with the Angels, he hit home runs like Babe. 148 in 3 seasons. I mentioned this once to Joe Garagiola, the sportscaster who started his life as a catcher. This is what Joe had to say.
And I could see where Bilko would give you that kind of hope of maybe the next Babe Ruth. When he hit a ball, he hit it. It sounded, it looked, and it acted like a home run.
I found out later that Bilko could drink more beer than Babe. Jim Brosnan was a pitcher for the Angels in 1955. He roomed with Bilko on the road. They also shared a few beers. Here's a conversation I had with Brosnan. When I mentioned the name Steve Bilko, what's the first thing you think of? Bros said, beer. The man was a great beer drinker. I said, I understand he had a wooden leg. He had a wooden leg besides the 2 he was carrying, which were huge, about the size of ale cans. I'm sure he kept a special tap in one knee in case he ran out. How much did he weigh? In his way, how much did he weigh? Over a period of time, I think about 900 pounds. He must have lost that much weight. Was he constantly dieting? In his way, he was constantly dieting. What was his way? He'd take a 6-pack of beer into the bathroom, and he'd seal off the door by putting towels against the bottom of the door, close the window, turn on the shower to hot. Then he'd sit on the edge of the bathtub while all this steam would rise up and he'd drink beer. All 6 bottles. He said it helped him sweat. Of course, sweat meant you were losing weight. And this is how he did it. Bilko's 3 managers in the Coast League didn't care what he weighed. And that really was the key to success out here, letting Bilko be Bilko. It was different in St. Louis, where the Cardinals tried to make him a Mr. America in tights. Listen again to what Joe Garagiola had to say about this.
He used to put a rubber suit on him and make that poor fellow run around and sweat and sweat and sweat, and then ask him to play 9 innings after he about dehydrated. He could hardly get the bat around, and he was still hitting the ball 400 feet in right center field.
One of the few Hollywood celebrities that Steve mixed with in LA was John Wayne. Why? Steve explained because he was a big baseball fan, and he was like the folks back home in the Honey Pot section of Nanticoke. In Honey Pot, Bilko was called Bunky. Nobody knew why, but if you lived in Honey Pot, you had a nickname. John became Jaeger. There was Zughead, Booney, Drups, Scooby. I went back to Nanticoke last November and was given a Honey Pot nickname. The Bilko family gave me this shirt, and my nickname is Whitesky. Now, if I turn this around, you'll notice it's a white sports coat with a pink carnation. And that was one of Steve's favorite songs, Marty Robbins singing A White Sports Coat with a Pink Carnation. Steve liked country music, especially Hank Snow and Hank Williams. He drank beer and smoked unfiltered Pall Mall cigarettes while watching Lawrence Welk or Roller Derby on TV. If you bought him a beer, he returned the favor because that's what folks do in Honey Pot. Steve attended St. Joseph's Catholic Church and sang in the all-men's choir. They were so good that people from other parishes came to hear them sing. After choir practice, the guys went to the Eagles Club to have a couple beers. If you lived in Honey Pot, you belonged to a club. The Eagles Club, the Honey Pot Club, the Alibaba Club, the Athletic Club Nanticoke, the Firemen's Club, a combination club and fire station in Honey Pot. Steve was a regular there. Steve Bilko is buried directly behind another club, the 400 Club, at St. Joseph's Cemetery. He was 49 when he died suddenly from a heart attack in 1978. Bilko was a hero to an entire generation of kids in LA. One of them was Wes Parker, a 6-time Golden Glove Award winner with the Dodgers. Wes is here today to pay tribute to his boyhood hero, Steve Bilko, who happens to share the same birthday with Wes, November 13. Another boy who idolized Bilko was Ron Kolb. He was 12 years old in 1956, a presidential election year when Ned Cronin of the Los Angeles Times proposed that Mickey Mantle and Bilko as running mates. He wrote, "A vote against Mantle and Bilko is a vote against home, mother, and bottled beer." On hearing of Steve's death, Ron Kolb wrote his wife, Steve's wife Mary, a letter that expressed the feelings of young boys like myself, Wes, and all of us who idolized Steve Bilko. Here's what Ron wrote. "No one used the term superstar in those days, but Steve Bilko surely was one. To this day, I consider him the last real American sports hero. Today's sports figures are surrounded by press agents, business agents, lawyers, fast cars, and faster women. They are surly and they are vain. Steve Bilko was modest. He was big in every sense of the word, gentle and kind. He never spoke ill of anyone, and his home run and hit home runs like clockwork. That's a real hero. That was Steve Bilko." Ron went on to describe a home run Bilko hit for the Dodgers against the Milwaukee Braves at the Coliseum in 1958. And here's what he said. "In the very first inning, Big Steve came to bat with 2 men on base. Before the public address announcer could say his name, we and thousands of others leaped to our feet and shouted ourselves hoarse. The count went to 3-1. We held our collective breath. Steve got a high fastball and drilled it high and deep to straightaway center. Wes Covington, the Brave outfielder, didn't move or didn't even look up. He knew it. The ball sailed 40 or 50 feet over his head, far back into the seats. It was a typical, prodigious Bilko homer. We jumped up and down. We hugged each other. We hugged strangers. We almost cried. We stood and cheered for at least 5 minutes. God, how we loved that man." In 1961, Bilko was playing for the Angels, their first season in the American League, and only one at Wrigley Field, where he was known as the home pro. Thomas Bilko, Steve's youngest son, carries in his wallet a news clipping and box score describing a game against the New York Yankees at Wrigley Field. The clipping reads, "The Yanks tied the score at 3-3 in the 5th on 3 singles and a walk, but Ford gave those 2 right back when he walked Pearson, and Steve Bilko hit a little white house beyond the right field fence." John mentioned this, I'll repeat it. With 2 outs in the 9th inning of the last game ever played at Wrigley Field, Steve Bilko belted a pinch hit homer off of Cleveland's Mudcat Grant. I asked Steve about this, and here in his own words is what he had to say before, as he was waiting on the bench, wondering if he was even going to bat. Steve Bilko.
I was down at the end of the bench, and me and Eddie Yost was down there. It was sunny, we're half asleep, and he hollered. And I didn't even pay attention to him because I figured, oh, hey, it's gone already. You know? So Eddie pokes me, he says, "Hey, he wants you to hit." I said, "You've got to be kidding." He said, "No." I said, yeah, might as well go make the last out or something here. So I went up, and the first pitch I think I took it, the next pitch I swung, it went out of the ballpark. So I remember I was coming around second base. I was even thanking Mudcat Grant, you know. I said, I don't feel bad because they hit the home run, but I said, you got such a lead, and I said, I needed it so.
Ron Kolb ended his letter to Mary Bilko this way. Steve Bilko and the feelings he inspired in us represent all that is noble in sports. But those days are gone forever. And now so is Big Steve. Yes, his memory can fill the void left in my heart, but no one can fill the void he leaves in professional sports. The induction of Stephen Thomas Bilko into the Shrine of the Eternals on his daughter Sharon's birthday ensures that his impact on LA baseball lives on, just as his name Stephen was handed down from his oldest son, Stephen Richard, to his grandson, Stephen Michael, to a great-grandson, Stephen Robert. As Ron Kolb put it, he shined so brightly and sadly so shortly. But I'll always feel blessed to have lived my life at a time when I could share the warm glow he generated. Steve's death in 1978 inspired this banner headline in the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner: Big Steve Bilko. The fans loved him. They loved him because he was humble. They loved him because he was loyal. And in a place called Tinseltown, he was real. He didn't say much, but when he did say something, he made it count. Come on, boy, Steve shouted to pitcher Stan Williams when they played for the Dodgers in 1958. Get the ball over. The beer in the icebox is cold now. If you listen carefully, you can hear Stout Steve now. He's saying, get this thing over. The beer in the icebox is cold now. Thank you.
And now, as we unveil the induction plaque for Steve Bilko, it's my pleasure to bring to the stage to accept on behalf of the Bilko family his eldest son, Stephen Bilko.
Like we have dual presenters, we have dual acceptors. Thank you so much, John and Galen, for those wonderful words and wonderful stories about my dad. It's just been overwhelming since we've been out here with the whole family. I wanted to say something else before I start my spiel here, but first of all, I would like to congratulate the other candidates and their families for being inducted into the Shrine of the Eternals. I know my father would be extremely proud to be a part of this list of sports celebrities. Secondly, on behalf of my family who's here today, I'm just going to take a little bit of time to let them just stand up for 1 second so we can put a face to a name. I'd like to, my wife is shaking her head no, but my lovely wife Mary of 42 years. Our son and his wife, our son Stephen and his wife Brooke. Their son, my grandson, and my buddy, Stephen. And of course, my best friend and my brother, Dr. Thomas Bilko, and his wife, Cindy. Their daughter, my lovely godchild, Barbara, and her friend, Taylor. Thank you for your patience with that. But we would all like to thank Terry Cannon so much, and the executive director, and all the board of directors, and the entire membership of the Baseball Reliquary for their hospitality this week, and also for acknowledging my father's contributions to baseball and inducting him into this year's class of 2015. I came out to the West Coast 39 years ago to see my father play in an Angels Old Timers game, Anaheim Stadium. My son was only 1 year old. My father was so proud that after the game, he carried my son around the entire 200 level of Anaheim Stadium. He took us behind the broadcasters. He took us behind the press corps, showed us the organist, the VIP Players Lounge. And he introduced the whole family to Gene Autry and his wife, and also Joe DiMaggio, who was there, Moose Skowron, Don Drysdale, Jim Fregosi, and many other players that were there that day. What wonderful memories we enjoyed and we still have. And to add to that, I was lucky enough, and my family was lucky enough, to get on the field this past Friday at the Angel Red Sox game. And my father's even making more memories for us, where I got to throw out the first pitch of the game. Unfortunately, please don't applaud. I bounced it 1 foot before the catcher. A famous philosopher once said that God gave us memory so we could have roses in December. Well, thank you, Dad, for all the wonderful memories you've given us, both as a father and as a professional baseball player. My father was a very humble man. He loved his family, he loved his friends, and he loved baseball. Here's the sad thing. I think he even liked umpires. But we're proud. He was proud of his humble beginnings, and we're so proud of the West Coast, you guys, for recognizing his accomplishments. I'm sure that he's smiling down upon us today, enjoying these festivities as much as we are. And I can picture him standing in the on-deck circle, holding his 42-ounce bat, just waiting for a chance to get up into the batter's box. Hi, buddy. So he could hit another one out. To quote my father, wow. We love and we miss you, Dad. Thank you, everybody, for remembering and honoring my father.
We'll conclude today's festivities with a few final remarks. As you just heard from the announcement, the library will remain open for 30 minutes until 5 o'clock. And we invite you to visit the Baseball Reliquary's new exhibition, A Baseball Buffet, which is in the library in 4 separate areas. The north entrance as you come in the north entry parking lot, and at the very far east end of the building, in 3 different wings. There's the reading wing, the humanities wing, and the centennial room, and we have exhibits going on there. If you don't get a chance to see that today, the exhibit will be up through July 30th. In the back of the auditorium, we have a number of items, reliquary caps and t-shirts, copies of the DVD Not Exactly Cooperstown, and most importantly, Baseball Reliquary membership applications. And in addition, Gary Joseph Sierakowski's and Galen White's books are available for sale, and they will be glad to sign those books for you. And we have some nice refreshments here. Please partake of the refreshments in the back of the room. Enjoy the rest of the afternoon, and until next year, we bid you a fond farewell.